Hello, and welcome to this Expert's Choice video. I am Félix Zorzo, Curatorial Assistant here at the Wallace Collection, and I would like to bring your attention to a set of objects that is both incredibly avant-garde and quintessentially 18th century. This porcelain tea service on display at the Wallace's back stateroom. The model of this tea service is known in the records of the Sèvres Porcelain manufactory as a déjeuner du roi. A déjeuner, which in French literally means breakfast, signaling the first meal of the day, is usually a tea service formed by a tray, cups and saucers, a sugar bowl, a milk jug and a teapot. In this case, the déjeuner du roi comprises the tray, one cup and saucer, and a sugar bowl. Tea services are frequently referred to by the name given to the tray. Our charming oval tray with its undulating edge is a plateau du roi, possibly an homage to Louis XV, its shape probably based on one of the trays that formed part of a large dinner service created for the king between 1753 and 1755. The cup and the sugar bowl, with their pear-shaped outlines, are known as épères, either in reference to an influential luxury goods dealer or to the king's secretary. Their bulbous shapes complement the shape of the tray, and the indentations of the saucer evoke the shape of a flower, a fitting comparison for an object that, in true Rococo spirit, brings the outdoors inside. Emphasizing this, a delicate flower crowns the lid of the sugar bowl. The outlines on this tea service may be restrained and delicate, even conventional for an upper-class Parisian household of the mid-18th century, but the decoration of each of these pieces is exceptional. From the early 1750s, chemists at the privately owned porcelain manufactory of Vincennes, to the east of Paris, started developing a series of ground colors and enamel decoration that, in combination with gilding, allowed artists to create striking pieces. By the time this tea service was made in 1762, the manufactory had become a royal enterprise, having been bought by Louis XV a couple of years earlier. It had new larger premises in the village of Sèvres, west of the capital, between Paris and Versailles. A larger workforce was gathered, the production process was improved, and royal money was pumped into the manufactory, the perfect conditions to achieve unparalleled craftsmanship. Skilled workmen and women were involved in the many stages of production. These included preparing the clay, a complicated process itself. Various minerals and other ingredients were baked in order to obtain an artificial clay called frite, which was then powdered, refined and mixed with other clays. This complex recipe compensated for the absence of kaolin, a fine white clay key to producing true hard paste porcelain, similar to that imported from the Far East or Meissen. At this stage, Vincennes and Sèvres produced an alternative known as soft paste porcelain. Round, hollow elements such as the cup and the sugar bowl were thrown on the wheel. The cup handle and the tray were molded, and the flower knob modeled by hand. A worker known as the repareur would finish the pieces, adding all the details and making sure that the final shape followed the original model. After drying, the pieces were fired in the kiln for the first time at about 1200 degrees Celsius, protected by clay domes. Of course, in the 18th century, there were no accurate means to measure the kiln temperature, and officials had to rely on experience and empirical observation, such as calculating how much wood they had already burned, or the color of the flames. The first firing resulted in a matte and glazed finish known as biscuit, a finish that can be appreciated on the unglazed edges underneath. Pieces were submerged in a liquid mixture that, after a second firing in the kiln, transformed into a glossy surface, the glaze. This was the moment in which our tea service would have received its extravagant painted or enamel decoration. Pink proved to be a difficult color to achieve. During the early Vincennes period, some white pieces were decorated in a reddish tone that varied from carmine to purple, prepared with iron oxide. Soon, a quest for a stable pink commenced, marked by a succession of experiments using gold particles suspended in the liquid enamel. Finally, in 1757 at Sèvres, an appropriate recipe for pink was found. Sèvres pieces with pink grounds were in production for only about a decade, and this particular decoration, known as rose marbré or marbled pink, can be dated to the years between 1760 and 1763. We know this thanks to the information kept at the Sèvres archives, but also thanks to a clever dating system introduced in 1754. Letters signaling years were added to the underside of pieces, and the letter I found under each of these three pieces tell us that this tea service was produced in 1762. These letters were encircled by the factory's mark, the royal cipher of interlaced L's for Louis XV. The letter N below is the painter's mark, an individual signature added by painters and, later on, gilders. N is the mark for the painter Joseph-François Alonclos. As one would expect from Sèvres, the application of a marbled ground was a rather complex process. Over the fired pink ground, blue enamel painting was applied in a cloud-like pattern, which, once dry, was delicately scraped away, revealing some of the pink underneath. Then, pebble-like carmine highlights, or cailloux, were added, and the piece had to be fired again. Finally, gilding was applied, here covering the surface left between the carmine pebbles and the blue cloud-like shapes. The pieces had to be fired once again at a much lower temperature, the gold mixture being highly volatile. The last step was polishing and tooling the gilded surfaces, in this case, looking for a glistening, sun-like finish known as sablé. In addition, this déjeuner is decorated in its white reserves with exotic birds on a landscape by the most celebrated bird painter of the manufactory, François-Joseph Alonclos. This exuberant treatment would have contributed to the very expensive final price for this tea service, transforming it into a luxury item. The fashion for rose marbré porcelain was short-lived, but only 4 years sufficed for the artists of Sèvres to produce an imaginative variety of interpretations. So, how would our tea service have been used? Drinking tea in mid-18th century France had become a fashionable social activity, as depicted in Michel Barthélemy Olivier's painting of 1766. At the beginning of the century, tea was usually served in Chinese porcelain tea bowls, but gradually, European factories, such as Meissen in Germany or Chantilly near Paris, produced similar versions with the addition of handles, creating the modern teacup. By the early 1750s, Vincennes was producing a variety of teawares, many of which were in production for several decades, as is the case of the three components of this tea service. The fact that it only has a single cup and saucer indicates that this tea service was destined to be used by one person, either in private, in the comfort of a bedroom or boudoir, or during the socially ritualized daily preparation known as the toilette. In the mid-19th century, The 4th Marquess of Hertford was one of the most active collectors of old or 18th century Sèvres porcelain in Britain. The collection of Sèvres porcelain at the Wallace Collection bears testament to this. However, we don't know how exactly this tea service entered the collection or who purchased it. We only know that it was acquired by 1872, 2 years after Sir Richard Wallace inherited Lord Hertford's fortune and collection, when it was exhibited at Bethnal Green. Either the 4th Marquess or his likely illegitimate son Richard Wallace are good candidates. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to know more about ground color decoration on Sèvres porcelain, please visit the Meet the Expert section on our website. Thank you for listening, and we hope to welcome you soon here at the Wallace Collection.